Hello everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room, guys. I hope you're well on this not so great Sunday here, but maybe better where you are. Today we're going to take a slightly lighter topic, to just bring things to a stage where we can relax a bit more, because it's been a lot of theory and a lot of speculation lately, and you've been with me and it's been great, and I've been enjoying this tremendously. But yeah, let's talk about 5 areas where INFJs are surprisingly good. At least they have great potential. And there are examples to back this up. They might not be aware that they are, but we're going to explore these topics now. Before I move on, briefly, remember I have written 2 books recently. Well, the Ecstatic Soul is about a year and a half old at this point. Classic work on the INFJ personality. Check it out below in the Amazon links. And my new novel, also Perspective on the Alienated INFJ Personality. Support my work if you can. Links below. Also, Infinite Castle and the Ecstatic Soul. So, when I was trying to build this list, I said to myself, I don't need to come up with 5 different categories. If it's 3, it's 3. I wanted to come up with at least 3, and it was quite easy. If it's 4, it's 4. If it's 5, it's 5. It's like, okay, let's see if I can come up with 5. And I did come up with 5. There's one particular area, it's the 5th one, so stay tuned. If you want to hear more about that area, where it's different from the other areas in the sense that I still can't quite give an account of why INFJs are good at it. That convinces me. So I'll be looking for your insights as well, so we can, again, collaboratively come to a stage where we understand this. So I suggest that we crack on. The first area is logic. When we think of the word logic, we think of TI principally. We think of mathematicians and formal logicians in philosophy. We think of an area that is, very systematic, very arid in a sense. There's no room for aesthetic. I know some people would debate that, but there's no real room for aesthetic exploration, for the NI sort of tendency of the INFJ to have visionary experiences. We're very much talking about, how things hang together in a formal way. But if you look at the history of math and the history of philosophy, you have if you have a little browse of personality database, you'll realize that there have been really some pretty amazing logicians and amazing mathematicians who are understood to have been INFJs. Let me just mention the mathematician Henri Poincaré. You can look him up, Henri Poincaré, on Parsi database. And obviously the logician Ludwig Wittgenstein among INFJs would be the one that first comes to mind. Now, what seems to distinguish these thinkers is their great ability for intuition. So in other words, to come up with some very creative ideas and then apply them through strong tertiary TI. So certainly in both cases, we have to assume that the tertiary TI was highly developed, that these individuals were geniuses, but also that the NI side of things was instrumental in providing new vistas. In other words, to allow ourselves to move beyond the notion that logic is just about how things hang together, but also that how things hang together is a matter of how we perceive things hanging together. There are different ways of conceptualizing things hanging together, and the capacity to open up new ways of looking at such things, to break the bonds of conservatism, seems to be a peculiarly INFJ talent. And from interacting with other INFJs online, I've noticed that they can be quite logical. It's just that it's often their motivation that draws them away from it. It's not what drives them the most. It's a talent that they could have, and they could have on display if they wanted. It's more motivational than skill related, that it's not always on display. The second talent, the second area that INFJs are surprisingly good at is rhetoric. I associate rhetoric with persuasion. It's the ability to make a point, to be eloquent about it, and to convince other people to get on board with you. Once again, it's a bit like in logic. INFJs will not necessarily have that on display. The reason why they won't have it on display is because, well, first of all, they don't like to be on display, and because for any introvert, persuasion is something that takes them out of their comfort zone. They have I think the talent, the eloquence. INFJs have, especially if they're healthy INFJs, meaning that they have their extroverted functions engaged. They have an intrinsic orientation to reaching out to other people, to deliver on the insights of their NI, what I call prescience. They want to be able to formulate things in such a way that it makes sense in a social context, not just for themselves. And they have a remarkable ability to be very eloquent about their thoughts if the FE is engaged. Because you often hear about INFJs being like, I'm not very eloquent, I'm not very persuasive, because NI is like there's so little verbal content in my intuitions, and so I don't even know how to phrase them. That's often when you're disengaging FE. That's often when you're not valuing FE enough. But INFJs who value FE, who are very in tune with their FE, you'd be surprised how persuasive they can be. The third area that I decided to pick is history. Now, the reason why I picked history, there's a number of reasons why I picked history. Historical perspective, being a historian. When we think of history, we think, someone is a historian just in case they have a good memory. And there's this rumor, there's more than a rumor, there's this preconceived notion circulating, throughout the online community and our subculture, that INFJs don't have a good memory, and therefore it's rare that someone would say, INFJs, NIFE, TISE, made to be a historian. We think much more like, okay, ISFJ, ISTJ, INTP, types with some decent amount of SI in them. Maybe introverts who like archives, hanging out in archives. And there might be an element of truth to that. Those types are not my concern or my principal concern in this video. But there's a couple of correctives that I think are in order in this case. The first corrective is that NI is not about having a bad memory. In fact, the memory function, the memory module or capacity in our minds, depending what vocabulary we want to use from cognitive science to describe it, it doesn't really, there's no empirical consensus that it is connected with our cognitive functions. In other words, having a certain set of cognitive functions has nothing to do with whether you're going to have a good memory, a capacity for retention. What it may well impact is your cognitive makeup, is what areas of your factual tank in your memory you're going to highlight, you're going to pay attention to, you're going to value those more. So you're going to focus more on certain events than other events, types of events over other types of events, and types of material over other. So you put your focus. So in a way, you are able to extract from your memory what you're most interested in, because you put more concentration on that. It doesn't mean that that's the only thing you remember. It's just what you prioritize. And because NI is not a literal function of intuition, is much more symbolic and is much more, looking at things in terms of the patterns that they have in common rather than literal resemblance. NI is much more often a function that is going to look at the commonalities between events, the commonalities between facts, and create continuities between them, see synergies between different events in time. whereas SI must much more like to focus on facts, names, the literal presentation of things. You know, it's going to focus on the units, and I is going to focus on the link between the units. Okay, and so the link between the units is just as historical as the units, because it creates the kind of connection between events that, you know, any historian wants to be interested in. So it's possible the SI historians would be more like, okay, I'm documenting all these histories, you know, and chronologically we'll see how, you know, it unfolds as I build my historical account. So you'll have a series of localized accounts building up a history, whereas the NI historian will start with, okay, this is the pattern, and over like a millennium, and inside this pattern fit in all those units. So there's a reversal of how things are presented, but NI is a very strong relationship to time and space. I've made a video about that you can check out. So can be great historians. I have two more you know, categories, as you know, that I want to talk about. One that is, it may be even more unexpected, is political advice or political strategy. So I don't think INFJs are made to be, you know, they're not natural born politicians. They don't really value the politician's life. They don't really value what comes with, you know, you make all these sacrifices as a politician, you know, privacy, you work all the time, you make all these compromises on your moral values, you have to be extremely pragmatic, and you get some returns: power, election, connections, prestige, maybe at some level socially. These are not things that the INFJ values, and they're certainly not going to be willing to take the brunt of, you know, like, make all these efforts they don't want to make anyway to get return on what they don't really value. So that's not what they're going to pursue. But I've noticed, and it's very, very much the case in French politics, also like in American history, there's been a lot of, American history, because I'm a historian by training, and I studied American history quite a bit. You'll notice there are a lot of INFJs actually in history that have been involved in politics, but they've been involved more on the advice side of thing. They've been advisors, they've been counselors, they have been the person that maybe the head of state or the minister goes to for consultation on a vision, essentially, because it provides the INFJ with the ability to not have to engage in all these annoying political stuff. They don't want to be in the limelight. They don't want that, but they want to be able to get the chance to discuss what their vision is and get the opportunity to be talking to someone within an FE partnership from their perspective, although the politician might not be FE. Well, a lot of politicians are FE, but not all of them. And they'll think, well, you know, like this politician and their vision, or they have an interest in what I have to say, which is great. And maybe I'll get to see my vision realized, you know. And perhaps the very, very first example of an INFJ political advisor, even though like we don't think about him that way, is Plato. You know, when Plato in the Republic was delighted when he heard that there were certain monarchs that were interested in his theories, and he thought that the Republic might finally be played out in practice. I mean, if he didn't see him as himself, at least to some degree, as a political advisor, he wouldn't have written the Republic in the first place. So we move to our last category, the one that I said I can't really explain it. It's physics. There are so many great INFJ physicists. Again, check out Personality Database. The one that I'll mention, because he's perhaps the most well-known among these, is Niels Bohr, Danish physicist and one of the pioneering, inventors of the... I thought the cat made noise. I don't know if you watched my video yesterday, but this is a different cat. This is Bash. Bash is he's less disturbed usually when I'm talking, so he's having a good sleep. Niels Bohr, Danish physicist, contributed to the construction of quantum theory, quantum physics, Nobel Prize, one of the very greatest physicists of his generation. It's a little bit harder to think about why INFJs are good physicists, because even among my friends, I remember I had also a student a few years ago, back when I lived in Switzerland. My neighbor had a kid, He's now a man. You know, he's now 19 or 20, but he was like 15, 16 when I was teaching him English lessons. I was teaching him English, and he was gifted at math and gifted at physics and chemistry too, you know, physics, chemistry. And he decided to go into physics. And he's apparently doing really well at the University of Geneva in Switzerland. You know, we're still in touch via Discord. And he's clearly an INFJ. And I'm like, you know, it's hard to know, because I would like to think that if you give an account of why an INFJ is really good at math, you can say, okay, TI. But in physics, you would expect a bit more TE, wouldn't you? And I don't really see. I mean, NI comes into the picture because NI has, again, the capacity to see things in a new way, to see how things are arranged in a new way. So you could potentially see a connection between a strong function of perception, in this case introverted intuition, and coming up with viewing the world through the lens of quantum mechanics. There had to be a change in worldview, the very way things hang together. Again, in this case, not in the way that logic hangs things together, but in a way that physics and the mathematization of physics hangs things together. But apart from NI, I just, you know, like having well-developed TE and well-developed SE also, you know, for principle reality, for principle of engaging with the material world, valuing the material. I mean, you really need to value the material world if you're going to be a physicist, because the world that you're analyzing is basically matter in motion. So it's a bit of a mystery. I don't necessarily claim that I have the last word on this, because there must be a good reason why INFJs are great physicists, and perhaps it hangs mostly on NI and perhaps having better developed SE than I think, and or better developed SE than average, sorry, and also that maybe TI can do the work of TE just fine. After all, you know, if there's a consensus that Einstein was an INTP, then clearly TI can do the work that TE might do in other cases, and we're just talking about fundamental approaches, you know. But the difference between Einstein and INFJ is that Einstein has highly developed extroverted perception, you know, and so again, even if it's not SE but NE, it's a function that puts you directly in touch with the external world. INFJ is a bit removed from that. So as much as I can see that working out very well in philosophy, in history, in logic, in math, in physics and chemistry, it's a bit harder. But let me know, you know, what your perspective is, because clearly there is an explanation. I'll stop here. Hope you enjoyed this video, guys. I'll see you next week. Don't forget you can support me on Patreon. And thank you again to all my Patreon supporters for your kind support. See you soon, guys. I hope you enjoyed it.